Hello, Jen. We are now live streaming on 3 different channels. I've never done this before. My cat said hi. She's excited. I'm excited. I hope
I'm
you're excited.
excited.
Are you excited?
I'm so excited. I love my time with you, Ben. Whenever I get the chance, it's a treat.
Okay, so this will be a treat for everyone listening as well. Can you share a bit about who you are and what you do and why these people need to listen about our conversation about questions today?
Ooh, that's a great question, if you will. My name is Jenn Lishanky. I am the Chief Engagement Officer at Be Social Change, which is a membership community helping people make their greatest impact through their careers and lifestyles. I basically have designed my favorite job and get to do the things I enjoy most in the world while making an impact. I feel like the luckiest person on the planet. In addition to being the Chief Engagement Officer, I'm also a career coach, and I support people in finding their purpose, living their purpose, and getting in touch with their intuition. And I have had the great pleasure of getting to chat with you, Ben, and talking about the sincere importance of questions. So I'm really grateful that we get to have further conversation on this topic.
Yeah, and just for some context, we recorded a podcast not too long ago. And during the podcast, I was going to ask a question. But before voicing it, my little coach brain in me was like, no, ask this question instead. This is what your intuition is saying. And then I asked that question and it steered our conversation in a completely different way. And then I even just called out the fact that I was thinking of asking a different question because why not? It just was interesting because it was such an like there was such a strong voice in my head that was telling me to ask a different question. And then we're like, well, that's important. We should talk about questions, which then
Yes.
led us here. Like,
Yes. And I love that you called it your coach brain because I think that's so important. Like there's a specific skill and a specific skill set that people hone as coaches that has to do with question asking. And I think each one of us can kind of coach ourselves or grow that skill set. But it is really something to build and to build upon. Yeah. I mean,
no. So what were you going to say? And then
I was
I'll.
going to ask you a question.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's so fitting. So why don't you ask some questions? Oh no, my cat is
What?
making so much noise.
I love it. Your cat is going to steal the whole show.
She is. She is.
Let me ask you, what was the first question that got you onto the track that you're on right now? Like, what was the question you asked yourself or that somebody asked you that brought you here? It's a hard one. It's a hard question.
Well, I think a bunch of questions pop into my mind. The main one is, why are you letting yourself feel stuck? Because it hit me when I was working in healthcare and going into work and not really enjoying my time there. It hit me that I was the one responsible for that.
Mm.
And so the question came up, well, you can do something about this.
Yes. And then it sounds like it was a very internal question, like it was something that you asked yourself, right?
Yeah, most of the milestones and growth that I've had in life have been because I've asked myself certain questions. And I think that's why I founded my company under the brand of Live for Yourself and under these concepts of self-leadership. It's because no matter what happens outside of yourself, you should be asking yourself certain questions on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis. We just talked about, right, just before we started recording, how I've been asking myself questions the past 3 days because I didn't feel good. I didn't feel like my days were even though they were productive and successful, I didn't feel good about them. So I asked myself questions about why that was the case and came to a solution. And so that's I think even why I think the way I do today is because I asked myself those questions in the past.
So powerful. And I feel like a lot of the people I talk to tend to have stories already formed and repeat those stories to themselves rather than allowing themselves to ask questions. And I'm curious, what is it that made you ask a question versus like reinforce a narrative?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so easy, right? To reinforce that narrative. That's our programming is to reinforce our narratives. Our brains like to go down the easiest path, the path that we've already know that we feel safe on. The way that we've made decisions in the past is how we're going to make decisions in the future, unless we intervene. But I was so passionate about personal and professional development that I think I just practiced my question brain so much. I practiced the reflection brain so much, and I built such a huge pause between emotion and action that I always had emotion, question, action.
Ooh, emotion, question, action. I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's an amazing sequence and an amazing recipe too for people to start to examine parts of their lives, right? Emotions can sort of be openings that questions can further define and give space for.
Yeah. So same question towards you.
Ooh, I love asking questions and then I'm very rarely prepared to answer them, which is actually one of my favorite things about being a coach is like just getting to ask a million questions. I think the question that I asked myself a lot and that I still ask myself is, what am I alive for? I think it used to be, what is the meaning of my life? You know, what am I doing to create meaning? And somewhere along the way, I think I stopped looking for meaning and decided that I was just going to live into life. And so that question has continually come up for me. It's like, what am I alive for? And even yesterday, I had the chance to do something really creative. I think I mentioned to you in this podcast recording that we did, I've gotten really into woodworking, which was a childhood passion that I picked back up. And so I got the chance to go out there and like sand down and saw down a couple of logs and that had already fallen and make them into tables. And it was
I'm gonna have to put an order for chairs, by the way. I moved into a new place. It's like empty. I need some chairs. Can you do chairs?
Give me like right now I literally just have like sanded wood. So like give me a couple.
Can I sit on it? It'd be better than what I have right now.
Might be tilting. Let me try it out a little more. But it was just this like amazingly creative activity. And what I realized is that in that meditative state of doing something that I deeply loved, I started to hear questions that were a little bit deeper than what I had been focusing on, you know, when I was like doing my computer work, going through what I needed to do for the day. And questions like, what is the nature of creativity? How do I be more generative in my life? And so I would say that there's questions that come up on a daily basis that surprise me. And what has been important for me is actually learning to listen to them. And that's where I like to help people is learning to listen to what comes up for them, because a lot of the time there's a lot of other noises and a lot of external questions that can drive us versus what's coming up for you internally.
That's a really good point, just in general, about asking powerful questions. They should be questions that help others or even yourself explore what is going on. It's not leading you towards something. It is not based on judgment. It is literally just, tell me more about that.
Yes. And then that's one of the things I admire about you. When you were sharing right before we hopped on live, you were sharing too that you've been asking questions just really open-endedly to figure out where it is that you want to grow into. And I think being able to ask questions that don't have judgment or implicit bias in them is really, really valuable. Do you have any like skills or tips that you've honed for doing that yourself?
Yeah, but prior to that, I want to learn more about the state of flow that you mentioned when we were talking, and how that has allowed you to find the right questions to ask yourself. And that's just super unique. And the more I ask you questions, I learn about myself. And so the state of flow of playing the piano or working out, and I'd even say the mindlessness of being in the shower and being underwater, I'd say expand that to being in the ocean when I have the opportunities, or hiking. That state of flow gives my brain an opportunity, and it sounds like you too, to dive into the depths and pull out the questions that you've been asking yourself, but maybe haven't realized.
This is so on point, and your metaphor is hitting home in a big way. If I can just share a quick anecdote before I get into that state
Please.
of flow.
Yeah.
Last week, I was camping outside in Colorado with a couple of friends. And I don't know if you've ever been to the mountain towns in Colorado where where like the Arkansas River runs through them, and it's beautiful. But there's this stream that was maybe like 50 degrees or something like that, with these beautiful rapids. And I was sitting next to it with some friends and saw a couple of people jump into the stream. And I literally just voiced out loud. It wasn't with intention or anything. I was like, shouldn't we do something like that? And my friend turned to me and she said, okay. And so in the middle of September, we jumped into 50-degree Arkansas River and just let ourselves go down these rapids. And so talking about the openings that a question provides, I think that that's for me, that was such a great example of like, you put it in the world and who knows what'll come, because that was surely one of the best memories from that whole camping experience, was jumping in the Arkansas River. Wow. And I think that has to do with what you're saying, as far as like when you let yourself get into the flow, right? When you go with the flow, there's kind of a magic that happens. And for me, like woodworking has become a place where I feel that flow. So as anytime I'm in a body of water. And for my organization, Be Social Change, we talk a lot about flow, which is a term that Holly Csikszentmihalyi, which is one of the craziest spelled last names you could possibly imagine, coined, in which he talks about optimal experience as when you're doing something that is creatively fulfilling, that's a little bit challenging, but not so far challenging that you have to engage all of yourself. And he talks about it in the context of like athletes who practice, right? And who practice their gift constantly. He talks about it in the context of academics who really get into the flow of their research, and that it actually provides this optimal experience. And I think for me, when I'm in that optimal experience, when I'm in that state of like doing something that's challenging, but also rewarding and natural and comes with growth, then I think there becomes, this is going to sound a little out there, there becomes this like channel to to some sort of higher questions. And for me, like, I feel like I'm in flow when I'm talking. I love humans. It's like a thing. And I feel like I'm in flow when I get the chance to talk with people, right? When you're really listening to what it is that you're doing, to what it is that the person is saying. That's a little bit of a riff for me on flow. What about you, Ben? Tell me about your experience with flow and questions.
But what I like what you're bringing up right here, and it's so important because I think there's multiple stages to asking powerful questions. And the first one is, at least for me, is getting out of your own head, like what you're thinking other people might be feeling or thinking, and instead letting yourself be open to that flow that you're talking about. Very, very often, the people I work with have issues because they are constantly wondering what someone else is thinking about them, instead of just thinking about just like being present and being in the environment. And so if you're not present in the environment, you don't have the ability to connect to that flow, to connect to your intuition, to become curious about other people. And I think the first step is, how do we stop that worry and concern that we have about other people's judgment, or am I asking the right question, or what do I say next, so that we can be present and open to asking powerful questions.
Wow. I think what you're describing as far as presence makes so much, like, it's one of the things I feel when I have the chance and the grateful opportunity to talk with you, is this feeling of like deep presence. How have you honed that in your capacity to listen and do the work that you do?
So I'll talk about myself, but also think about leaders and other people in the world right now and what they might be dealing with. And it's almost impossible to be present if you don't believe in yourself. And believing in yourself doesn't mean I know what I am living for, like we were talking about before, what my meaning is. Because it could just be something as simple as, I'm a student, or I am an explorer, or I am here to learn, and which is, or you have certain values. I care about developing others, or I'm here. I'm going to put on my curiosity hat today. And so getting that clarity of purpose and meaning, you can do that by event, you can do that by conversation, you can do that overall in your life, is really important, because then if you have that clarity of purpose, you're not doubting why you're there. You're not doubting what you're going to say, or if you're asking the right questions. Then after that clarity of purpose, with that extra level of confidence, you literally just stay present to the people around you, and try to really actively listen to what other people are giving you, instead of trying to figure out what you need to take. And so it's something as simple as, if you're not sure how to prompt a conversation, what's on your mind? Or what have you been thinking about lately? And then listen to the person's answer and let that build into the type of conversation that you're actually interested in learning more about. But really, it needs to start with, this is why I'm here, being very intentional about that, and understand there's no risk from the situation. You're in a safe place, and that allows you then to really to give instead of try to take. And I don't know if any of that made sense. Hopefully it did.
It absolutely does. And it makes me think of like the levels to which we have dialogues with ourselves. And I think a lot of the times the dialogues with ourselves can be really critical, or it can be based on like doubt, as you're saying, negativity, a sense of misdirection, and that those dialogues tend to steer us away from a sense of like what I like to think of like a sinking sense of presence. And what I mean by sinking is like watching a rock drop through like very still waters, right? Into the very core of who you are, into the very bedrock of what it is that you stand for. And so like the very top layer is this critical self-talk. And then in my experience as a lifelong meditator and meditation teacher, something I've noticed is that a lot of meditation techniques actually ask questions to bring you into a state where you're removed from that critical analytical brain and you start moving toward a deeper center of yourself, right? I don't know if people are familiar with the idea of koans, which are these unanswerable questions, like what did your mother's face look like before, or what did your face look like before your mother was born, right? These questions that are unanswerable, but that bring us to a different place and bring us a little bit outside of ourselves, so that we can continue to sink deeper and deeper and deeper and find those new questions, those new insights. It's really powerful what you're describing.
That is really powerful. Thank you for that, by the way. I'm going to be up all night trying to figure out what my my face looked like before my mother was born.
Isn't that interesting? I had a high school teacher give us a test and ask that as bonus incentive. And he's like, go look up koans. And I still think about that question.
If anyone listening that needs some dinner party questions, there you go. So let's get into some very specific techniques in terms of asking powerful questions, because I think there are some pretty hard and fast rules that lead to, I wouldn't say maybe better questions, but fuller questions, or questions that deepen relationships, or questions that help guide others, I think is a good way to define it. So off the top of your head, what comes up in terms of skills that relate to asking questions?
I'm really happy that you say this. And I need to give a quick shout out on this exact question to my mom, actually, who is this incredible badass person who works for an organization called Essential Partners. And they are doing work that I find to be really fundamentally important right now, namely around bringing together people from opposite sides of different political issues, or opposite sides of conflicts, opposite sides of community affairs, to have dialogue, right? And their entire methodology comes down to question asking. Really enjoy it. Check it out. Whatisessential.org. And they have a whole questionnaire about how do you ask questions with the intention of getting to someone's story or someone's beliefs, rather than getting to someone's like defined opinions, right? Because if I'm coming from a place, whether internally or externally, of like, this is my defined fact or my defined opinion, I'm not really open to anything. And the purpose of a question is to open a door, right? If I were to share a story that might blow you away, might help you understand why I'm coming from a particular political perspective, from a particular place of self-worth, then we can start to have a dialogue, right? We can start to open more doors and more doors. So some of the things that they recommend, which I highly recommend checking out, is thinking about the language you use for questions. Are there biased terms in it? Are there terms that everyone can understand, right? If you're asking questions that don't have universal understanding, then you're not going to get to any sort of deeper authenticity. They also talk a lot about how questions are meant to be asked from a place of listening, right? If I were to come into this conversation with you, Ben, and without listening to anything you said, just start asking you questions, it would feel kind of redundant for you. You've already answered a lot of questions. I know things about you. So how can I listen to what's coming up for you and like what you've generously shared with me, and ask questions through, like, building off of that energy and building off of what it is that you've already put out there. That listening is so core and so essential for being on this journey together. How about you? What are some of the best practices you've gained in asking questions?
Yeah, I love what you said, by the way, about terminology and like to think about who you're speaking to. I remember one time before I was a coach and I was serving at a private like dinner party, and I was talking about what I was doing at the time in healthcare, and I used an acronym, and one of the persons that was there stopped me and said, never use an acronym in a conversation if you're not sure of the people that you're speaking with. So you never know if they're going to actually understand you. And it was like, I've never forgotten that. I've never forgotten this. This must have been probably 12 years ago. And it makes sense. Can you be very aware of your audience and ensure that you're not making anyone feel uncomfortable with the verbiage that you're using, the terminology, even the word length at times. I see this a lot with my physician friends when they're describing something. They just go into medical speak and say, hold on, you're losing people here. I know that you spent years learning this, but I think there's a really good quote. It was by Albert Einstein. I don't know the exact quote, but it was the responsibilities of a genius is to make complex seem simple. And I totally, it's not the exact quote, but that makes sense that geniuses can make anything seem simple. So when you're explaining something or asking questions, ask yourself how you can do that. Something else you mentioned is in terms of, are you actually on the path of the conversation with the person you're asking questions with? And you hit the nail on the head there. Like, have you listened? What do you know about this person already? What are they saying to you? And a powerful conversation and powerful questions come from being on the same path as the person that you're with. And so often I'll be coaching someone who initially thought conversations were very much, I'm going to ask this question A, I'm going to get the answer. Then I'm going to ask this question X, which is completely unrelated to the answer that they gave me about question A. And that doesn't lead down this path that leads you deeper and deeper to better answers, which is really what you're looking for, and deeper answers, which come from asking questions that build on each other. And so just one tip, well, a couple tips, I'll start with one that really hit home on this topic, is to never ask more than one question at a time. I'm not sure what you think about that. I seem to have lost you a little bit, though.
That is a skill that I am still practicing, and I think it is such a good one, and I recommend it to everybody. Uh-oh.
Just a little
can you hear
behind.
me okay?
Yeah.
It might be my computer melting in the sun. Can you hear me okay?
It is just a little lagged.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me? I was just saying that I think that's an amazing skill that I'm still, oh, that's kind of fun. It's an amazing skill to be able to ask one question at a time, and it's to being able to be on a journey with someone and be able to ask questions and get answers and explore. And so I find myself sometimes getting overexcited. So I'm working on that one still, but I think it's hugely important.
Yeah, if you ask people multiple questions, then they have the choice of choosing what question they're going to ask you. And then they also get potentially confused by the questions that you're asking all at once. And I think it kind of takes them out of the conversation and takes them out of being able to dive in deeper. So that's something I've really tried to do. And even if I'm asking a question and I want to ask a different question instead, sometimes I'll just let it play out, because they don't know that you were thinking of asking a different question. And they only know the question that you voiced, and they're diving into that themselves. So instead of stopping them, a lot of times I'll let that go.
Ben, that is a great point. And I'm wondering, how do you listen to yourself inwardly to figure out which question you're going to ask? You brought up the experience that we had together when we were recording the podcast recently, and you were thinking of one question, then ended up asking a different question. How do you trust the question that's coming up for you?
Probably practice more so than not, just because of the intuition that I built up over working with clients. And I think it does take practice. And it brings up a point that asking questions, powerful questions, takes practice, and it's not something that we're taught. It's not something that we do a lot because we don't usually ask the people closest to us powerful questions. So just really through practice and through paying attention to the person I'm speaking with, looking for inflections, looking for changes in body posture or intonation, into what they're feeling and what they're thinking. And also, I mean, as a coach, you have goals or you have priorities for each individual client. So that helps also in terms of what question I'm going to ask or the path that they're on.
Yes. I think what you just mentioned as far as being attuned to subtle clues and subtle cues is so important, right? And it goes back to this deepening sense of presence and capacity to listen, right? And so I think anyone who's trying to build the skill of question asking has to do so in tandem with the experience of listening, right?
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. How would you recommend people practice?
Ooh. I think if you can practice with yourself, that's always the best place to start, in my opinion. Practice asking yourself every question from what am I here for? What am I doing? Why am I doing this? And practice asking with not judgment, but curiosity, I think is a really good way to start, right? We can have totally incredible and transformative dialogues with ourselves inwardly if we allow ourselves to. And so I encourage people to pursue those and to allow themselves to start just awakening to what's coming up for themselves inwardly. I recommend that. I also recommend when you're listening, figuring out new senses with which you can listen. What I mean by that is obviously we listen with our ears, but can I also observe with my eyes? Can I observe with my intuition what's coming up for me as someone's saying something? That's actually been the number one skill that I've practiced as a coach, is just listening with as much attention and presence as possible. And I find that the natural questions come up from that place of listening. It's almost my wonderful coach and mentor always says, "Can you listen someone into speech?" And I think that's a really powerful way of thinking about the dialogues that we can have with one another. How about you? How would you recommend people start practicing?
I think you just dropped the mic right there. I don't know if I have anything else to say. I'm just gonna walk. I'm just gonna end the broadcast. That's it.
Well, we do have some amazing questions in the chat.
hmm I would say
Yeah.
taking it upon yourself to start asking questions, and real questions with real curious intent, because so often we go through life and it's, how's your day? How do you feel? What did you do? What do you want to eat? Okay. And so if you want to get better at asking powerful questions, you need to ask powerful questions, and you just need to start. And you're going to, trip up every now and then, but it's just a question. So it's nothing bad is going to happen. There's no risk of asking curious questions, which is really what it is, and see the responses that you get from the people around you. But make time for it, because when you ask a real question, real answers come up. And when real answers come up, they also, people around you, it does deepen the relationship, but it does then create an expectation of action based on those questions. So keep that in mind as well.
That was your mic drop right there, Ben. That was so damn good. I love that. Journaling comes to mind as you're saying that, like making time for the questions, honor them by writing down the answers. It's like there's a lot that you can do there.
Yeah. Okay. So before we log off for today, Emmanuel asked in the beginning, which question do you ask yourself the most? And we talked a little bit about that in the beginning, but that was in the past. Like, what that question that you ask yourself in the past. So what about now? What question do you ask yourself the most, Jenn?
Besides what am I going to eat, because I am like a massive snacker and COVID has only exacerbated that, I would probably ask, the question I ask most is, how can I show up in this moment? It has certainly brought me to places of prayer, especially during this time. Prayer has been like a dialogue that's really been opening. When I ask myself, how can I show up in this moment? sometimes all we can do is pray. For me, a lot of times it has to, I'll ask myself, how can I show up in this moment before I'm on a coaching call and while I'm on a coaching call? And again, I feel like that always invites me into a place of greater listening. So I think that would be the one for me. What about for you, Ben?
Wow. I just like to always sit back after your answers for a minute and just relax and take it in.
I
Just
feel
let
that
it
way.
settle.
I feel that way about you. I feel like too, before we end this broadcast, I just have to say you have such a beautiful voice, and like you could lead meditations with your eyes closed. I feel like you bring people straight to that place.
If you ever need an ad hoc meditation instructor, I am down to try that out.
Deal.
I led a Apple meditation once during one of my events. I don't know if you've heard of that. I've had it done to me. So we were talking about, I think it was like appreciation. And the meditation I led everyone through was to take you through the steps of an apple getting to be in front of you. And so we gave everyone apples, and then we had everyone like smell the apple and see the apple and understand, like look at, and then ultimately taste the apple at the end of the meditation. But the meditation was about 5-10 minutes long. And you envisioned the apple from seed, right, from being planted to growing to being picked to being transported to then being in the store to then coming into your hand. And it was so, I even will take myself through that sometimes before I eat, because bringing that level of consciousness to your life is related to asking powerful questions, and it does help you pause and stop and say, what's going on right now, which is really what is I think the seed, right, to a powerful question is what's going on right now. And then that allows you to ask the questions that you need to in any environment. And I think that's actually the question that I ask myself. It's, am I aligned right now? What's going on? Because if I ever feel off or stressed or frustrated or anxious, there's something off. And I need to give my awareness to that so I can work through it instead of trying to hide it through TV, through alcohol, through other risky behavior, through mindless tasks that my brain just is used to doing.
I need a moment to sit back with that one. That is so powerful, what you're describing. And I think alignment is like this ever deepening grace that we can extend to ourselves and others. So I love hearing that question.
Whew, just taking a breath.
Yeah, same. I feel like I'm going to either need to like meditate for 15 minutes or run around the block after this conversation. I feel so powerful and attuned. So thank you.
I like how William mentioned in the comments that he likes to think of questions others people's ask but don't ask. So then it allows him to answer those questions without having those questions asked of him. I think in terms of clarity of the people around you, that's really important. Whenever you're going to speak to anyone, it's about what questions might they have of me during this. And you can even ask them that as well. What questions might you have? Or when you're explaining something, I like to always ask individuals to, what do you think it is that what do you think it is that I'm asking you? Or can you walk me through the process of what you're going to do next to ensure that comprehension and understanding?
Yes. I think that's so powerful, William, you rock, for bringing that up. And I think those types of difficult questions are the ones that we don't give a lot of space or credence to in our teams, in our families, in our lives a lot of the time, at least here in the States. And I think when you can find that environment where you can ask those questions of one another, it's really deeply powerful. And in the meantime, being able to ask them of yourself is so important.
Yeah. And Brad said don't log off. But where's Brad? Brad, you have a question for us? Brad's a rock star. I
That's
hope
awesome.
But so before we do actually log off, if we don't see any other questions, one more knowledge drop on how to ask powerful questions for our audience.
For me or you?
I'll start us off. I'd say avoid why. Why it tends to put people on the defense. So if you can use what, how, and like those types of starters for a question, it tends to lead to better answers or less defensive answers.
I love that. I really appreciate you saying that. because I'm even thinking about all the whys that I ask myself. And I think you're right that they don't tend to be the best questions that I ask. So that's a really great one, Ben.
That's a fun game to try to do, is to try to rephrase things without asking why.
No more whys. I'm going to try this for the next week. I'll get back to you on how it goes.
Please do.
I think when it comes to asking questions, I'm trying to figure out what question I'm not asking myself, or I could ask myself in this moment. The question of like, what is the ultimate knowledge trap? And what's coming up for me is the idea that if you're going to ask a question, you have to respect yourself and the answer, even if it's not an answer that you necessarily like. The reason I say that is I think, especially in our current climate, it's really easy to ask questions with malice, or easy to ask questions from a base of like, I know this, and therefore I'm going to ask this in a way that's going to like entrap you somehow. Those conversations I feel like are becoming all too common. And so respect the question, respect the answer, and see how just allowing yourself to be open to an answer that you might not even like, that might not be in alignment with what you believe, what that does and how that transforms your capacity for presence, your capacity for listening, and try that.
That is so good. Oh, how often do people ask questions with the purpose of entrapment, or to be like, haha. And if
I
like,
gotcha.
if you want to do that, just tell the thing that you like, that's on your mind. Call it out.
Yes.
And be like, this is how I feel right now. Instead of trying to trap people, and all you're going to do is just build more conflict in your relationship. And why would you choose that path?
I have stories upon stories about this throughout my career and throughout my personal travels to rural places and all around the world. This could be another whole conversation in and of itself, Ben. And I hope we do get the chance to talk again soon, because it's always such a pleasure.
Yes. So please, thank you for staying over, by the way. How can our listeners find out more about you?
Oh, check out besocialchange.com. You can check out our upcoming events, including one that we have in 45 minutes called the Sustainability Connector. That's going to be facilitated networking, as well as incredible speakers talking about sustainability from different angles, environmental justice, wildlife conservation. It's going to be amazing. besocialchange.com. You can check out our events, check out our coaching, as well as our online career course for how to find a job during this time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen. This was a pleasure and amazing as always. I feel like I've just taken a meditative sound bath or something. So this was a pleasure.
This was just as refreshing as jumping in the Arkansas River, Ben. You are something else. Thanks for hosting this.
Yeah. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye.
It says ending. I think I'm still live, so I'm trying to end right now. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. This was a pleasure.